Vanakkam. Hello friends. We have been seeing the history of the early Cheras, and in the previous episode we saw about the rulers of the 8th and 9th generation, Cheraman Marivanko, also known as Mavanko, and Cheraman Koko de Marban. As we come to the end of the Chera lineage, K. N. Sivarajapillai, in his The Chronology of the Early Tamils, shows how he has given the names of 16 rulers belonging to 10 generations of Chera kings. He also shows how he has left out 4 rulers from the list: Seraman Palai Padiya Perungadungo, Kotambalathu Tunjiya Makode, Adan Avini, and Seran Vanjan. While Avai Duraisamy Pillai, in his book on the history of the Cheras known as the Seramannar Varalaru, has given the names of a few more Chera kings gleaned from the Sangam literary works like Seraman Nambikuttuvan, Seraman Andai, and Seraman Ilankuttuvan. Now, all these rulers were omitted from the genealogy table for want of corroborative evidence, points out KNS, while mentioning that if in future new evidence was unearthed that could help re-evaluate their position, they could be included in the respective generations. In recent times, such evidence has been unearthed in the form of inscriptions found on coins and in rock caves. Coins with the Tamil Brahmi inscription reading Kuttuvan Kodai and Ma Kodai were discovered from the riverbed of the Amaravati near Karur, and these coins appear to be what is known as portrait coins bearing the head of a ruler, with similarities to the portrait coins issued during the rule of the Roman emperors Augustus and Tiberius. These coins have been dated to around 1st century Common Era. Well, a large number of such Roman coins issued by emperors Augustus and Tiberius themselves have also been excavated over a period of time from the Coimbatore and Karur regions, attesting to the brisk overseas trade that must have been happening between the Roman Empire and the Chera kingdom. In the year 2007, in the eastern desert of Abu Kharaya in Egypt, a square Chera coin was excavated bearing an elephant on one side and the Chera insignia of the bow and arrow in a drawn position known as the Vangavil on the obverse. This coin was dated to around the 2nd century Common Era. Official seals containing the name Makode have also been unearthed from the riverbed of the Amaravati. The Makode seals have been given a dating between 1st century before Common Era and 1st century Common Era, and except for the name, there are no other markings to indicate a particular Chera ruler who would have issued these coins. We have already seen how there were a clan of rulers who went by the name Kodai. So these coins were more likely representative of the Kodai clan of rulers. On that note, a very important evidence that gives specific names of Chera rulers were found in rock inscriptions in a place called Puhalur. The kind of evidence that KNS mentioned way back in the year 1932 that could help alter the genealogy table. Ironically, these inscriptions were first discovered in the year 1928 itself, but were not properly read till the noted epigraphist Airavadam Mahadevan entered the scene in the year 1965. About 15 kilometers from Karur, on the southern banks of the river Kaveri, is the region of Puhalur that Mahadevan mentions is the Puhaliyur of the medieval times that finds a mention in the Tevaram hymns. And here, these regions have been renamed today as Velayudam Palayam. The inscriptions are found atop a hillock known as the Arunatar Malai, which itself was known as the Puhali Kundru in earlier times, points out Mahadevan. And when he first visited the caves in 1965 and read the weather-beaten but still intact Tamili inscriptions, Airavadam Mahadevan says he was stunned as they were the first inscriptions that could be dated to the Sangam era, and the inscription read, "Tha Amanan Yatror Sengayaban Uraya Ko Adan Sel Irumbore Mahan Perungadungo Mahan Irangadungo, Irango, Aha Arutha Kal. A veritable piece of history that shows that the inscriptions were made during the rule of Perungadungo, who was the son of Selladan Irumborai, and denoted the offerings made to a Jain monk by name Sengayaban in order to probably commemorate the investiture ceremony of Perungadungo's son Irangadungo, who is denoted here as Iramko, meaning the crown prince. Mahadevan dated the inscription based on paleographic evidence to the 2nd century Common Era, and on another part of the same hillock, further inscriptions were found, though in a damaged condition, having the names Pittan and Kotran. Kadungo referred to a branch of Chera rulers who ruled from a region known as Kadungo Nadu, points out Avai Duraisamy Pillai. In the Valluvanadu territory of Kerala, which until the 18th century was under the rule of independent chieftains, there were places known as Kadungovur and Kadungopuram that must have been under their rule. Now, Perungadungo was a prolific Sangam poet, having contributed 58 poems to the Sangam corpus. 57 of them were set in the Palaithinai, a division that talks of the separation of lovers assigned to the dry desert regions of Palai. This earned him the epithet Palai Padiya Perungadungo. His son Irangadungo was also a Sangam poet and earned the epithet Marutham Padiya Irangadungo. But so far, we have recovered only 3 poems written by Ilangadungo, 2 in Agananuru and 1 in Nattinai, and probably the rest were lost, for he must have too composed quite a few to have earned him the epithet Marutham Padiya Ilangadungo. In an Agananuru poem, Ilangadungo, in passing reference, records a piece of history. We have seen how very many times in Agananuru poems, these sort of historical informations are used as similes by the poets who mention them very casually. And the Agananuru poem 96 begins, Kanji Ura, Wontodi Ayathullum, Ni Nayandu Kondane, Enbavor Kuramahal Aduve. They say that he united with a young woman whose friends were wearing bright bangles. Well, it is a typical scene where the hero has gone to the house of a Paratte, a harlot, and upon his return, the Tori, the confidant or close friend of the heroine, refuses entry and points out to the hero how the fact that he went and stayed with the harlot has become public knowledge and is being spoken of. Sembon Silambin Serinda Kurangin, Kalul Mamai Agdai Tandai, Annal Yane Adubor Solar, வெண்ணல் வைப்பின் பருவூர் பரந்தலை இருபெரு வேந்தரும் பொருது களத்து ஒழிய ஒளிருவாள் நல் அமர்கடந்த ஞான்றை களிறு கவர் கம்பலை போல அலர் ஆகின்றது பலர்வாய்ப்பட்டே. The gossip that has risen is louder than the roars that rose in the battlefield of Paruvur, where the father of the beautiful and dark-hued Ahude, a chieftain of the Chola king, waged war against the 2 monarchs, the Cheras and the Pandyas, and defeated them, killing them in battle and capturing their elephants. A very interesting term used here is the term Annal Yane, respect given to this wise animal who was a king's trusted mount. Ironically, a Chera king recording the victory of the Cholas over the Pandyas and Cheras, though the name of the battle of Paruvur is recorded, we are unable to identify the Chola emperor for whom Ahudei's father fought, Ahudei being a very common name used to refer to several Sangam characters, both male and female. Now, Perungadungo has rendered some excellent poems in the Palai Kali of Kalitohai, as well as in Kurundohai and Ahananuru, and one in Purananuru. Unfortunately, these poems do not reveal any historical information regarding his role, but they do capture several nuances of Sangam living, especially the virtues and duties of a hero or a king. Interestingly, Avai Duraisamy Pillai points out the extent to which Vedic Puranas and legends had entrenched themselves in the Tamil narrative by that time, the 2nd century Common Era, by quoting how Perungadungo sings of the 3-eyed Lord Shiva destroying the flying fortresses of the 3 Asuras in the skies, and the episode of the Pandava princess being set fire inside an illusionary Arakku Malige, a wax palace, and even about the love god Kama. Avai Duraisamy Pillai also points out how Perungadungo was known for beautifully portraying sceneries from nature, and in a poem from Nattinai in the Palethinai, poem 202, the setting is such that the hero is bringing the heroine together with him through a forest path which is full of the Konga Maram, the yellow silk cotton tree in full bloom, and he sings Kandisin Valiyo Kuramahal Nunde Arumin Bayanda Aramse Tingal Sel Sudar Nedungodi Pola Palpum Kongam Aninda Kade. Oh, look, my beloved, the bright flowers of the kongai trees in full blossom resemble the bright light of the rows of lamps lit during the month of Kartihai when the Arumin, that is the six-starred constellation of Pleiades, that is Kartihai, appears bright in the sky. So, Avai Duraisamy Pillai here points out how the Kartigai or Periya Kartigai that we observe now was a very ancient Tamil festival and how it was carried out through the medieval times by giving a reference of a Thevaram hymn sung by Thirunjana Sambandar at Mylapore in Chennai, where the line goes, Vizhakeedu Kaanade Podiyo Poombavai, and he regrets how Tamil people have forgotten the significance of such ancient festivals and today observe new festivities like Deepavali which have no real significance for them. For brevity of thought, we will look at Kalitohai poem 2 set in the Palethinai sung by Perungadungo. Here, the king places the importance of nurturing relationships over earning wealth and sings தொலைவு ஆகி இறந்தோர்க்கு ஒன்று ஈயாமை இழிவியென மலை இறந்து செயல் சூழ்ந்த பொருள் பொருளாகுமோ நிலைய கற்பினாள் நீ பின் வாழாதாள் முலை ஆகம் பிரியாமே பொருளாயின் அல்லதை. Is it real wealth, the wealth that you earn traveling afar, passing mountains, so that you do not have to bear the ignominy of saying no to those who seek alms from you, embracing the chest of your beloved who cannot bear your separation? Isn't that true wealth? Now, this thought seems to be as relevant for this day and age. In yet another poem in Kurundogai, again set against the Palethinai of separation, the hero comes from a very affluent background, and yet here he is ready to leave the heroine and go in search of wealth. The Tholi, the confidant, is not very sure about the hidden motives for the hero's action, and here in the poem, the heroine consoles the confidant saying, உள்ளது சிதைப்போர் உளரென படாஅர் இல்லோர் வாழ்க்கை இரவினும் இழிவியென சொல்லிய வன்மை தெளியக் காட்டி சென்றனர் வாழி தோழி. May he live long, O friend, after telling me, those who waste away what they have are not rich people. Those who live off inheritance are worse than beggars. He went with determination to earn wealth across the vast ancient land with no water, where wayside bandits with spears, expert murderers like Kutruvan, wait to pounce on those who go along those dry paths, and where kites wait to eat the flesh of those dead. So, in ancient Tamil culture, it was regarded shameful to live off one's inheritance, and Perungadungo records this thought for posterity. There is a single Puram poem that sings the praise of Perungadungo, rendered by a lady poet, Pei Mahal Ilaveini. The Purananuru poem 11 records the heroics of this king. Tan பொருனை புனல் பாயும் விண் பொறுப்புகள் விரல் வஞ்சி பாடல் சான்ற விரல் வேந்தனும்மே. The city of Vanji on the banks of the cool Tanporunai river is ruled by this king whose fame is sung in verses by many. வெப்பு உடைய அரண் கடந்து துப்பு உருவர் புறம் பெற்றிசினே புறம் பெற்ற வயவேந்தன். He captured many guarded forts of enemies and made them retreat showing their backs. மரம் பாடிய பாடினியும்மே ஏருடைய விழுக்களஞ்சின் சீருடைய இழை பெற்றிசினே இழை பெற்ற பாடினிக்கு குரல் புனர் சீர்கொளைவல் பான்மகனும்மே என ஆங்கு ஒள் அழல் புரிந்த தாமரை வெள்ளி நாரால் பூ பெற்றிசினே. He gifted the Padini, the female bard who sang his praise, with a lot of precious, beautiful jewels and adorned her with a garland wherein were tied golden lotuses with a silver strand. Though KNS does not accord Perungadungo a place in the genealogy table of the early Cheras, he definitely was a king proper who ruled around the 2nd century Common Era. And so was his son Ilankadungo. Now, coming to the last Chera ruler of the early lineage, Seraman Kanaikal Irumborai. The Sangam poet Poihayar comes across as a very important linear link poet, having sung Kokodai Marban of the previous generation. Poihayar renders a poem in Nattine, poem 18, that captures a war in which Kanaikal Irumborai defeated a small-time chieftain called Moovan, and the poem goes on to describe how Irumborai captured the king and humbled him and then extracted his teeth and brought them back to his capital Tondi and embedded them on the gates of his fortress as a trophy of his victory. This barbarous act must have undoubtedly been instigated by some action of Moovan, about which nothing whatsoever is recorded in the poem. We already saw how Kanaikal Irumborai was defeated and imprisoned by the Chola king Kochenganan in a previous episode. I will leave the relevant link here. The scene, given as the Battle of Tirupporur in old commentaries, the Chola monarch defeated and imprisoned Irumborai and kept him prisoner at a place called Kudavayil Kotam. Whilst in prison, Irumborai rendered a heart-wrenching Puram poem in which he narrates of how he begged the prison guards for water, and when eventually after a delay they brought water to him, he felt so ashamed to partake of it. Purananuru poem 74, sung under the subdivision Mudumori Kanji, a Thinai that claims honor is the highest virtue and true wealth that provides happiness to a leader. The poem goes, Kulavi pirappinum, Untadi pirappinum, Aal Andru Endru Valin Tappar. If an infant dies at birth, or even if it is born as a mass of flesh, even though it is yet a full-grown adult, my ancestors gave it a warrior's burial by inflicting cuts with a sword. தொடர்படு ஞமிலியின் இடர்படுத்து இரிய, கேள் அல் கேளிர் வேளாண் சிறுபதம், மதுகை இன்றி வயிற்றுத் தீத்தனிய, தாமிரந்து உண்ணும் அளவை, ஈன்மரோ இவ்வுலகத்தானே. Alas, it has come to this, and I am suffering in prison like a dog, in chains, not cut up like a hero at war, and without any mental strength, I plead for water and food from these prison guards who have no generosity to quench the fire in my belly. Do parents of royal families beget children for this? Definitely not. Now, the earliest commentaries to this poem record how, so singing, Irumborai chose to end his life rather than face the misery and humiliation of life in prison, whereas later legends claim of how the poet Poihayar, who was also a very close friend of Irumborai, rendered a work known as the Kalavali Narpadu on the Chola king Kochenganan, and how upon presenting the work, Poihayar made a desperate appeal to Kochenganan to free Irumborai from captivity, and that the Chola king obliged. Now, to understand how this narrative came about, again, kindly watch the episode 87 on Kochenganan. Judging from the surrounding circumstances, the great family of the Chera kings appears to have undergone an eclipse in this generation, and in another 2 centuries, this ancient family became thoroughly dismembered, writes KNS. Before concluding the rule of the early Cheras, mention must be made of what is popularly known as the Gajabahu synchronism, first proposed by V. Kanahasabai Pillai in his book, The Tamils 1800 Years Ago, published in the year 1904. It is based on a few lines from the epic Silapadiharam, where the Chera king, Seran Sengutuvan, is said to have built and commemorated a temple to the goddess of chastity, the Patni Tevam Kannahi, and Ilangovadigal records of how several rulers attended the consecration of the temple, including one Kayavahu of Sri Lanka. Now, this Kayabahu is conjectured to be Gajabahu, mentioned in the Ceylonese chronicles, the Mahavamsa, a real historic personage. He was known by the name Gajabahu Khagamani, and his rule is recorded too as between 113 and 134 Common Era. This synchronism was taken as a sheet anchor by early Tamil scholars to register the dates of Sangam literary works themselves. We know that Silappadiharam is an epic, a story, and cannot be taken as a historical account, while the Paditripattu, that sings the praise of the Chera kings in 100 songs, is definitely a very important source of Chera history. P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar, in his The History of the Tamils from the Earliest Times to 600 AD, points out for the first time how it was the mischief of the redactor of the Paditripattu that gave rise to a confusion which itself led to the Gajabahu synchronism. We know that in Paditripattu, every canto with 10 songs each sings the praise of one particular Chera king. Thus, the fifth canto sung by Paranar sings the praise of Kadalkelu Sengutuvan. And at the end of every canto, the redactor attaches a padiham, and here the redactor wrongly identifies this Kadalkelu Sengutuvan with the Cheran Chengutuvan of Silappadiharam. So, while Paranar himself does not mention of any temple to a Patini Teivam, the redactor, inspired by the Silappadiharam, adds these lines, Kadavul Patini Kalgol Vendi, Kanavil Kanam Kanayin Pohi. Continuing in verse, an absurd tale of Kadal Pirakotiya Seran Sengutuvan marching up to the Himalayas and bringing a huge piece of rock to erect the statue of Kannagi, and how he bathed this rock in the waters of the Ganges while returning, not to mention the several Aryan kings whom he encountered and conquered en route. So, the redactor's inspiration from the Silappadiharam leading to these lines being added to the Padiham of the fifth canto of the Paditripattu. Early commentators like Adiyarku Nallar and the Arumpada Urayasriyar, who commented on this, did not question the veracity of the Padiham, and Kanagasabai Pillai took it forward in his Gajabahu synchronism, and even early Tamil scholars like S. Vayabari Pillai in the year 1956 and Kamil Zwelabil in 1973 endorsed the synchronism. But this was before other archaeological sources were available. Now, researchers like Taiken, in the light of inscriptional evidence found in the rock caves and on Chera coins, have declared the synchronism itself as redundant. So, until archaeological evidence is unearthed to indicate the contrary, the early Chera line comes to an end with Kanekkal Irumburai. Of course, in the light of inscriptional evidence, we need to re-evaluate the genealogy table set down by KNS way back in 1932 to include the likes of Pale Padiya Perungadungo and Marutham Padiya Ilangadungo. For now, we have concluded the rule of the early triumvirate, and in the next few episodes, we will continue with a brief review of a few important Sangam chieftains before we go on to the history of the Kalabras. Vanakkam.